Live sex shows, blatant racism, sexual harassment, embezzlement, multiple affairs, pimping, abuse of position, modern slavery, treating people like meat, silencing victims of sexual assault, paying people off with company funds, nepotism, and so much more. Vince McMahon stands accused of all of these things, sometimes on screen as well as in real life. Having now resigned in shame, he is free to pursue whatever his next steps might be, and there have been plentiful rumours over the years that a career in politics is the next step for someone who has direct business connections to former President Donald Trump and potential future presidents Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. Having paid millions in order to guarantee non-disclosure, silencing those with first-hand knowledge, Vince McMahon has now walked away from the WWE and connected allegations, taking his personal net worth and massive income with him. We are talking billions of dollars of income that he will receive for doing nothing despite all of these allegations and investigations. He also left so much unsaid about his income, his next moves, and the investigation against him that was put forward by the WWE itself, which is now quietly closed in the background with no public information put out. In researching for this video and compiling the list of sources in the description below, I continue to uncover a near endless array of quotes, accusations, and scandals. Today we put them together so that you know the details, so that you know who this man was that was running the company. The facts and the fire behind the smoke will be on display. Before the WWE funded biopic tries to change the narrative, before any biopic that comes out tries to do so, let's explore what actually happened, what information is actually out there, and what's really going on. There are still so many questions. Isn't it about time we started to get answers instead? What happened to Vince McMahon and what's going to happen next? Vince McMahon founded Titan Sports, the parent company of the WWE current, in 1980, after taking over the WWE from his father, also Vince McMahon. I am going to provide a bit of background as to who Vince McMahon is before we get to the scale of scandal he's actually been undertaking recently. Under his stewardship, the company value reached just under $5 billion this year, with Vince himself almost entirely responsible for its growth. There is absolutely no question that modern wrestling is Vince McMahon's child. Certainly the more of this video you watch, the more you might start to think it's the only child he's ever actually cared about. But that's just you. Due to being the majority shareholder of the WWE still, Vince McMahon himself makes millions every year from the company even without actively being an employee after his resignation from any sort of creative role. He has also twice tried and twice failed to launch the XFL. The fact that he stood there decked in XFL apparel, surrounded by XFL portraits, paintings and so on, holding an XFL football, apparently did not hit the market as he was hoping. In fact, he's tried to launch a lot of companies over the years, and his only actual success has been the one that his father built and then signed over to him. Comparisons to Donald Trump are already well in play, but that connection will be coming up again. Through his work with the WWE, Vince McMahon has become one of the most influential men in America and indeed the world. There were even rumours he was planning to buy Newcastle Football Club before it was bought by a Saudi Arabian company. He has connections to huge names in sports, politics and media. There are obvious names that we can reference here, such as The Rock, Ronda Rousey, Tyson Fury, but also he is directly connected to Donald Trump, Mike Tyson, Dana White and more. During the last few years, Vince McMahon even had Florida Governor Ron DeSantis in his corner. Yes, the same Ron DeSantis who is rumoured to be planning to stand as Donald Trump's main competitor to become the Republican candidate for president. There is unfortunately a little bit more coming about Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis, but the focus will still be very much on Vince. In many ways, I do have to say that's who Vince McMahon was. past tense. After the Wall Street Journal exposed a series of scandals and accusations of sexual harassment, Vince McMahon left the WWE in disgrace. Meanwhile, his connections seem to be drying up at record pace. Since his retirement, not a single one of the names that I have mentioned there have come out in support of Vince McMahon, or have even really mentioned Vince McMahon. In fact, the only person who seems willing to support him is Vince McMahon himself. The days where the entire McMahon family stood alongside Donald Trump in the White House seem to be long done, even though one McMahon continues to sit at that particular table. This may have something to do with the level of scandal that has been hovering around Vince McMahon for decades. In fact, he seems to feed on it like a disaster porn vampire. Steroids, racism, sexual harassment, live on-screen sex shows, the Montreal Screwjob. Eric Bischoff always said that controversy creates cash. At times it seems as though that was Vince's only actual route to success. In fact, the position that he ended up in charge of the biggest wrestling company and one of the biggest companies in the world, seems to be literally stood on foundation of scandal. We're going to start by examining how intertwined in fortunes the McMahon family is with Donald Trump, the former US president. We'll then break down in detail the accusations, the harassment, the choices that were made that led us to this moment before wrapping up on those all-important next steps. Take a moment now to hit like on the video to help share the information here and subscribe for more in-depth analysis and exclusive news like this in future. What I'm going to share here needs to be known. People who support Vince McMahon need to know who they are supporting, and people who choose not to support Vince McMahon need to know who they're choosing not to support as well. Oh god. Oh god. Vince McMahon and Donald Trump have been partners in crime for decades. For now, let's just say that the phrase partners in crime is just an expression. Trump hosted WrestleManias 5 and 6 back-to-back in 1989 and 1990 respectively, and in many ways he's been tied into WrestleMania ever since. Donald Trump is in the WWE Hall of Fame, a place where there are unconfirmed rumours that Vince McMahon is headed next year. WrestleMania, as we know, is Vince McMahon's jewel in the crown. It's the bedrock on which the WWE was built, and Donald Trump was written into it early. Even if you're already aware of this one, stick around. The Donald Trump rabbit hole goes pretty deep. Donald Trump featured in an interview at ringside during WrestleMania 20. It was not good. It wasn't good during WrestleMania 4 or 5 either, but Donald Trump isn't exactly the most concise or charismatic speaker, especially not nowadays. He's done a lot of speaking recently. I'm confident you know what I'm talking about. If you give him a microphone for more than 3 minutes, you still haven't actually heard anything of value. Trump also featured in the infamous hair versus hair match, competing in proxy as Bobby Lashley. I don't really want to point out the irony there, so I'll just leave you to work that one out yourself. He even got a few good hits in on Vince McMahon himself. Would you believe it? That's a clip that's gone far and wide. It's the most meme-worthy Donald Trump has ever been. In fact, it's a clip that he used in order to show himself beating up fake news. I'm certainly not hoping that Donald Trump retweets this video to quote tweet attack me. That would be terrible for my career. Vince McMahon's reward for all of this effort with Donald Trump, including the segment where he had actors playing Obama and Rosie O'Donnell, well, the Vince McMahon family, or the McMahon family should be said, got a seat at the table, whether as reward or otherwise. Linda McMahon, the wife of Vince, was brought into politics directly by Donald Trump upon Trump becoming president of the United States in 2016. Linda McMahon was hired specifically to lead Trump's Small Business Administration, a huge part of his economic plan for the growth of the United States economy and for the Make America Great Again movement. She has undertaken many roles since, particularly recently raising funds for his campaigns, and in fact very recently met with Donald Trump in preparation for his next presidential campaign. McMahon, for his part, has also been in connection with Trump's likely competitor for the Republican presidential nomination, Ron DeSantis. More on that one shortly. Now, there are disagreements on this next bit, but let me try and cut through it as best I can. Anytime I've asked a question, I've received a simple answer here. While Vince and Linda McMahon are still married, they are not together. Given that Vince has been seen out to dinner with other women quite recently, that seems to suggest that the two are not necessarily still on the same partnership that they once were. This is important to establish, given the level and amount of scandal that we're about to start exploring. If that is not the case, it certainly begs the question of how Linda feels about all this, but it seems like the separation is a fact. Up next, you see, is the exploration of the true depth of activity we're talking about here. Steroids, screw jobs, sexism, racism, sexual harassment, affair after affair after affair. Let's get into the details of what actually happened here. As I do dive into these, let me know in the comments below what you knew about already and what is brand new news to you. I'm trying to make a definitive video here, but there is a lot of information that would need to be gone through. Some of this is definitely out there already, but it's only when you start to pull it all together that you realise who Vince McMahon chose to present himself as on screen, which in many ways was just a turned up version of the reality behind the curtain. We have to start with the steroid scandal of 1993. This was Vince's first major run-in with the dark side and the first example of the potential for self-destruction that McMahon is capable of. The accusations made against him were simple, that he was encouraging the use of steroids amongst his locker room in order to get a leg up on the competition. I'd imagine a lot of you watching this will be aware of this. I'm going to recap it, there's plenty more coming. His biggest and most key defender here was Hulk Hogan. This of course is the same Hulk Hogan who got the name Hulk because even the incredible Hulk couldn't compete with his muscle mass physically. The same Hulk Hogan that would defect to WCW shortly afterwards to pave the way for a character evolution that gave us a new generation of Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. The same Hulk Hogan who I will be mentioning later around all of the racism potential that will be mentioned as well. Vince escaped any major scrutiny from the steroid trial. But the shepherding in of the new generation, Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels and more, was not without its own risk. Under pressure from WCW, McMahon had to take the backstage antics out front, furthering the first knife in the back of the concept of kayfabe. I say out front, maybe the phrase taking it out back and shooting it is a better metaphor for this. Unwilling to surrender the WWF Championship at Survivor Series 1997, Bret Hart was forced out of the championship and of the company by a furious Mr. McMahon. Mr. McMahon took a punch for his troubles, but this was the first open and public establishment of just who Vince McMahon could be. He attempted to kayfabe the character after this, but we didn't realise until recently just how real this was. My word, did it get worse from there. After the conclusion of Mr. McMahon's Bret screwed Bret narrative, we had the birth of the Attitude Era, in which Vince McMahon's creative wheels were unchained, an unparalleled period of success that came as a result of certain people and certain groups of people being horrendously misused and potentially abused. First and foremost, as regards Vince, we have to establish that we are talking about a truly strange person here. There are reports that Vince McMahon doesn't trust anyone who sneezes. That's quite a lot of people. There are quotes about Vince's preference to throw people into his pool at his home because, well, reasons. This is apparently a major prankster backstage, even at times of his own locker room, who allowed a culture of bullying and abuse in his locker room from people who've had all the reports about them, the Ric Flairs on the plane ride from hell, the JBLs, actual bullying, people who had their bags defecated in, and nothing was done by management. It's no wonder the rumours of Randy Orton flopping his penis onto the shoulders of writers weren't publicly followed up. Let's get to the family part. In 1998, Vince started involving his family in storylines more, in sort of a endearing way. Shane McMahon would be a crooked referee. Sounds nice and harmless, right? He's being introduced to the company, he's being used in a way that is sort of family friendly, and you can see why they're doing it. It's a solid introduction to a character. Stephanie McMahon, meanwhile, would be stalked by and nearly married off to The Undertaker. Nice, harmless, family friendly entity. Wait, what did I just... Stephanie McMahon was a wonka. Oh, right. Stephanie McMahon was a one count away from marrying The Undertaker in a dark ceremony orchestrated by Vince McMahon himself as The Undertaker's supposed higher power. He was marrying his daughter off to a dark wizard in order to screw over Stone Cold Steve Austin. For a belt. For a bit of tin and leather. Don't worry, it gets worse. This at least is in character, but there's still so much more to come. A $110 million lawsuit was lodged against the WWE after the departure of former women's champion Sable, accusing sexism and sexual harassment within the company. I may have mentioned defecating in a bag, that may have also been mentioned in that. The culture within the company is something that we're going to mention again, and something that we've already mentioned. We'll be mentioning again once we get to one John Laurinaitis and the whole pimping business. The Godfather always said pimping ain't easy. Turns out when you're Vince McMahon and John Laurinaitis, that might not be the case. The lawsuit was eventually settled quietly, with Sable signing, you guessed it, a non-disclosure agreement, and then returning to the company to share limousines with the boss on screen. The words non-disclosure agreement are going to pop up so much in this video that I feel like it's been emblazoned in bold text on the inside of my skull. By this point, of course, Vince McMahon has made sexual misconduct a part of his on-screen character. I say this because we were quickly introduced to a storyline in which Mr. McMahon used blackmail and his authority to force wrestler Trish Stratus to strip to her underwear in the middle of the ring in front of thousands of people in the arena and millions watching at home, then get down on her knees and bark like a dog for him. This is without even mentioning the Kiss My Ass Club, the whole testicles the size of grapefruits commentary, and of course, the fact that during this particular segment, he seemed like he was about to drop his pants and demand some attention. Attention. We get worse from there, because we head back into Game of Thrones territory. We return to the category of weird things he made his daughter do, with the storyline that I only really need to say the title of. Hot lesbian action! Involving Stephanie, whom he had already tried to marry off to The Undertaker purely to mildly annoy Stone Cold Steve Austin. Can you believe we are barely scratching the surface here? Shane McMahon has gone on record talking about a planned storyline during Stephanie McMahon's pregnancy in which Vince considered the possibility of claiming to be the father of said child himself. I don't know if I want to give you a second to let that sink in, so let's just not. From incest to racism next, both on air and off. Firstly, Vince McMahon taking the opportunity to right himself the use of a racial slur live on air in a segment with John Cena. It's not exactly something that you can just pretend you weren't already aware of, is it? That's before we go any deeper into accusations of literal racism backstage. Gail Kim, a former wrestler under his employ, has been very open with her accusations. Meanwhile, the suspension of Titus O'Neil a handful of years ago certainly raised a lot of negative attention, and let's just say Vince didn't handle that very well either. Add on to that the Hulk Hogan situation as aforementioned, and things get even worse. Hulk Hogan has said, and clearly, at least at some point, believed extremely racist ideals. A lot of people backstage in the WWE have not forgiven Hogan for this, but apparently Vince McMahon has. McMahon not only used him anyway, but paired him directly with Titus O'Neil so that he had a visible endorsement from the aggrieved party. How exactly did anyone think that this would be a good idea? In what way could... Fair. Fans rightly saw through this one. Thankfully. Hogan hasn't been back since. That said, Vince has left the company, so who knows what the intention actually would have been had the two of them been able to work together again. It started with just storyline things, and yet here we are realizing how often art is made to imitate life. Vince McMahon under lawsuits for sexism, sexual harassment, starts bringing this on air as well. We've discussed incest, we've discussed racism. It's going to get worse now. There was a live on-air sex show between Edge and Lita to celebrate Edge's first championship win, in which there are reports that Lita was specifically instructed to accidentally flash the camera in order to ensure a viral moment came out of it. Note once again how it's a woman's body being used to prop up a rating. The same things that McMahon has already been accused of. It's stunning how often an accusation is made and then literally comes true storyline reasons shortly afterwards. Before moving on to the affairs that actually forced him out of the company though, there is one more person I need to mention, and I'm going to do this as delicately as possible. Ashley Mazzaro. If you're already aware of what happened here, consider this a trigger warning and skip forwards a minute. Note firstly that I am sourcing all of this information in the description so that you know what reports I am referencing, so if you want to know more, check under the line. Paul London has made claims that Vince McMahon was actively harassing Mazzaro and trying to get into her hotel room during a WWE tour. Mazzaro herself stated in 2006 that Vince McMahon encouraged her not to report that she was drugged and raped during a WWE tour of Kuwait. This was not a storyline. These are real life accusations. Another name to discuss, Rita Chatterton, WWE's first ever female referee who accused Vince McMahon himself of raping her. I am not a member of the police, I am not a private investigator, I cannot sit here and state what happened for a fact in either of those situations. What I can do is lay out all of the accusations and the facts that already actively exist, leaving you to make your own conclusions. Unfortunately, there's still more. If I do miss anything, because there is just so much, drop a comment below telling me what I should be adding to what I'm trying to make the most comprehensive analysis of Vince McMahon available on YouTube today. The Wall Street Journal were the first ones to break the big story that actually brought Vince McMahon to his knees, embarrassing those wrestling journalists who claim to be the be-all and end-all of reporting wrestling-based news. Traditional media waded in and cut the WWE wide open with the report that Vince McMahon had paid hush money to a number of women who had been working for him in order to maintain silence on his affairs and abuse of his position as chairman. At this point, and with no guarantee that we have all the information just yet, there is more than $12 million that has been paid out in hush money payments, which came directly out of the WWE itself instead of Vince McMahon's private money. The blatancy of that particular move. Accused of rape, accused of encouraging someone to hide rape, still goes on to have multiple affairs with his employees. The word shameless springs to mind. These are people that work directly for you. You are, with no question, one of the most powerful and influential men in America. Surely, at some point, the brain kicked in. Even just in an attempt for self-preservation. But based on the information that's come out, apparently not. The word shameless springs to mind. Though there are stronger words that I could say, I'm just not going to. I'll take a second here just to say how difficult putting this video together has been. Because the more you look into accusations against Vince McMahon, the more accusations seem to emerge out of the woodwork. The sheer brazenness of it all is mortifying. Despite anything thrown at him, Vince McMahon kept calm and carried on. When the news first broke, he still came out on SmackDown and said, "Hi, we're going to be together forever." He still has shown not an ounce of humility or remorse in any public forum. He's just walked away. The accusations go further, stating that once Mr. McMahon was done with his sexual relationship with one member of staff, he simply passed her on to a colleague of his. Head of Talent Relations John Laurinaitis left the company shortly afterwards under investigation from the board. Despite all of this, Vince McMahon was able to walk out of the WWE with his head held about as high as you possibly can, given that he had his tail tucked between his legs. He still holds on to over $1 billion worth of WWE stock, though recent fluctuations will have impacted that figure. He actually benefited financially from the increase in share price that came from his removal from his position in creative. He walked away without any police investigation or any non-company investigation of any sort. He vanishes quietly into the night, earning a whole lot of money for the rest of his life for doing absolutely nothing. Hey, good work if you can get it, right? There is a definite expectation that from here, Vince McMahon finds a way into the Republican political party. Donald Trump is still very much in play, and despite being largely frozen out publicly, that's never stopped Donald Trump from using someone before. After all, to Donald Trump, this is just another example of a great man being cancelled by cancel culture and the wokerati. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is also still in play, as he openly went to bat for Vince McMahon and the WWE during 2020 and 2021, fighting for their right to continue performing despite a statewide lockdown to break the rules that he himself had been setting. For now, Vince McMahon is sitting at home, licking his wounds. That said, we've already seen him out and about, on a date, meeting new women. Do we believe that he's learned anything yet? So we've reached the point where we say goodbye, Vince McMahon. But for how long? Personally, I always assumed Vince McMahon would die in the chair, and I don't believe for a second he'll stay out of the public eye now that he's seemingly been dragged kicking and screaming away from it in the first place. Do you see Vince McMahon getting a Hall of Fame induction? Finding some backdoor route back into the WWE? Onto the White House run? Let me know what you think below the line. If you'd like to see more in-depth analysis like this, check out this video on Bray Wyatt and make sure you subscribe, because I promise you, more is coming. Thank you everyone, and enjoy your day.